Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. I'm Peter and I'll be talking about resilience during the current pandemic, what it means and how it affects students and their outcomes. Compared to topics like motivation, resilience is not a big issue in EFL or L2, but it is in many other contexts. A student can be resilient and so can a curriculum. Essentially, the term applied to a student means that he or she has the ability to bounce back from adversity. And in the case of a curriculum, it means that the curriculum doesn't fall apart under strain. So you can see why this is an important topic to consider given the current situation. In my case, in the first semester of 2020, I taught just over 300 students across 4 departments at 2 universities. These were all English majors, those training to be English teachers, or students who aim to use English in the future. In theory, these students have a fair level of English and reasons to be motivated. Resilience really separated students who could do well under lockdown conditions from those who couldn't. And we can also see differences in what worked effectively in terms of decisions about curriculum too. We don't know what the corona situation will be like a few months from now, but I hope that some of today's content will be at least a little helpful for you in terms of preparing for the coming semesters. So here's what I plan to talk about today. As you can see, I've front-loaded the takeaways near the start of the presentation. If you get that far into it, you'll be able to judge whether the rest of the content is useful for you or not. I'll come back to them at the end with more details and a little about what we can do in 2021 to help our students become a bit more resilient. In the middle of the presentation, I'll talk more about what resilience means and why it's important for university students. After that, I'll go into specific detail about the situation in Japan. Before we circle back to the key suggestions, I'll show what students did and what they found conducive to strong performance in 2020, and how activities and platforms can mediate that experience. So here's the overview of the talk. You can see that I'll talk about resilience and also some related concepts that are quite practical. We'll look at activities that students found engaging, and I'll show examples of student work. The next 2 points are about timing, ethics and research design. First of all, it's perfectly possible to design an experiment with a control group that experiments how resilient students are and how curriculum impacts resilience. But is it ethical? At a time when record numbers of students are forced to quit college due to financial distress, we should be putting our efforts into helping them, not boosting our publication count. Could we research this more rigorously? Of course we could. But should we? I really don't think so. On a similar note, the 4th point is about discussing student experience without coding the data. It's better to spend time on levels of data analysis, at least under normal circumstances. But this is something we can come back to. For now, it's better to prepare for the coming semester, which starts in April in Japan and next month in Korea, I believe. Stephen Sterling, one of the most prominent researchers of resilience in tertiary contexts, talks about the need to get student experiences out in public for discussion. And this is what I'd like to do today. So for now, I copy what many resilience researchers have done, which is to paint with very broad strokes and not identify students by grade or gender or any other characteristics. Instead, let's look at the 3 ideas that seem to be true for most students most of the time. So here are the 3 takeaways without too much detail. First of all, students really didn't care for Moodle or other learning platforms on a full-time basis. Teacher homepages were seen literally as more friendly and user-focused. What's convenient for the institution may not suit students during stuck-down home lockdown all day. Second, whether teachers use an LMS or a homepage or some other method, students appreciated getting away from screens for some of the time. Physical analog activities with nobody watching or being watched was popular relative to typical textbook use or question banks provided by LMS. Finally, understanding how much control they do have and promoting attempts to leverage that is good for students. Control theory is not new, but for students moving from a strict high school system into college classes being held in their bedrooms, it's important to think about what actions they can take to live well while maintaining their learning and moving towards future goals. Resilience is a big part of that. So here's the first of 2 definitions. Notice please the words adversity, adaptation, and process. Viktor Frankl wrote a lot about this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Gramsci used it in studying children and Erikson in his stages of development. If you know the concept of grit or Dweck's work on growth mindset, you'll know how important resilience is in education. Our second definition comes from the APA and adds the words outcome. It also offers ideas for future coding protocols when we see words like internal, external demands or mental, emotional and behavioral flexibility. Well, there's not much work in EFL on resilience. If you've ever run your own program, department, or led students on a study abroad trip, you know its importance. When there's a competition for places, higher levels of resilience lead to students getting picked. It also helps them graduate on time, be accepted into the best internship programs, and not surprisingly, find better jobs when they graduate. Building a track record of resilience is a virtuous cycle for students. The more you show you can handle, the more you'll get access to opportunity. But what makes students resilient? Claxton proposes a model that is actually both practical and teachable to students. He says that these four things build learning power. As you can see, it's applicable not only to university under normal circumstances, but also during a lockdown. It's another way to think about future data analysis when lockdown's over. But for now, let's consider how we can encourage these four things in our learners. There are definitely learners at Japanese universities who lack one or more of these, and their post-graduation future never seems that rosy. Oppositely, students who work on all four of them for first grade will be in a strong position by the time they graduated. So to help students attain these, some colleges and universities offer workshops in resilience. The McQuillan paper is from the UK and shows what students tend to lack. As you can see, this makes the 4R model seem worth teaching to students. I think this is one strong idea for the coming semester. McQuillan's research is about the human part of resilience. The second paper is about the design and delivery of a curriculum. A resilient curriculum works well when things go wrong and helps students get back to where they were. Even during normal times, this is a useful consideration. But 2020 was all kinds of abnormal, and 2021 isn't looking so much better in many locations. Which brings us to Japan. Our school year starts in April, which was fortunate in terms of getting things set up. We were able to hold a truncated orientation for students before sending them home to study. It was important that first grade students had some training in registering for classes, for example, and learning the basics of using the LMS and so on. Depending on their high schools, they may not have had much use of computers in their study prior to entering university. In fact, depending on their major, many students don't need to use the school's LMS for much during the course of the semester, so second and third grade students were not in the clear either. In most trouble, though, were students who were due to graduate. As you may know, students in Japan need to secure work before they graduate, and they really only get one shot at it. It's important to get the best job you can straight from college, as this has lifelong implications under the current system. Sadly, as a result of the pandemic, many companies reversed plan and chose not to hire anybody at all. The world of work has implications for students too. We see a range of styles when classes are held on campus. From my own experience, what King calls segmenters make more reliable students, and I think that over time, these people did better during the lockdown too. However, many students reported issues relating to boundaries and struggling to manage without a physical campus to be part of. As for integrators, reflection and resourcefulness from Caxton's work would seem to be priorities to focus on. If they can do this, they might be less likely to lose track of things. But approaches to study were not students' only problems. Some do not have computers at home or printers. Others have poor internet, not suited to watching large video files. Of course, they all seem to have expensive phones, but to afford these, they often work part-time to the detriment of their learning. There's a lot to be said about the students and their families' priorities here, but the key point is that for many students, the transition to learning at home was not smooth, and remedies would have been expensive for some of them. As already mentioned, the first grade students' orientation was shorter than usual and left little time for mastery. On top of that, while centres, such as the Language Centre or the Study Skills Centre, mandated that all their instructors use Moodle, they're using different versions of Moodle. Departments, meanwhile, did what seemed best to each instructor, meaning that even in small departments, students needed to become familiar with a wide range of platforms. Students in my department regularly use Zoom, Teams, WebEx and Moodle, as well as instructors' own homepages. Whether you're an integrator or a segmenter, this is a lot to take on board. As well as access to learning becoming harder, many of the good points of entering university were removed. Students' social experience were much curtailed, as were opportunities for language learning. Anecdotally, the rate of students quitting was about twice as high as usual, and so was the percentage of students who dropped classes. So what was their experience like? First of all, the image on the right shows you what Moodle looks like to a student in Japan. On the left is the homepage I used, made with Weebly. It has all the same basic functions as Moodle, but allows for larger file sizes. In fact, though, institutions had to increase the functionality of Moodle throughout the semester to keep up with what was needed. In the same vein, I spent $40 for a Weebly Pro account, which allowed me to put video files up to 1 GB in size, with no limit on how many files. This was convenient for classes like phonetics, which became much harder to teach online compared to face-to-face. First grade students really had little time to interact on this, so here I focus on second grade and above. A few students wanted to see a Moodle-only rule across the whole university, which does make some sense. It could work in many departments, but not necessarily all of them. For example, the art department needs special consideration, as it includes digital work with very large files, pottery and sculpture, which are hands-on and they need space. Space, light and equipment are generally not accessible in student accommodation. But where teachers had their own pages, these were popular and gave students a sense of being planned for. Site maintenance is most commonly an issue for students with poor time management, but it's true that problems with an instructor's own page can be fixed much quicker than if there's something wrong with Moodle. So for many students, their language development and other classes improved about as much as usual, despite all the challenges. Two groups of students actually improved more than expected. A number of strong students said that lockdown helped them. There was no commute, no need to prepare in the morning, and there was nothing to distract them. And it's true that these students' final projects are very high quality. Surprisingly, some of the least capable students pulled themselves together. Although there are only a few of them, students who should have graduated the previous year also turned in work that was much better than expected. It's possible that a lack of distraction also helped these students. Sadly, some students did not do well with language or other kinds of learning. Typically, these students were just okay in previous years, with face-to-face support from instructors and classmates helping them. Without this, they were largely lost. To go back to the definitions of resilience and the 4R model, we can see the importance of reflection and flexibility. These students seem to lack these attributes and persist in maladaptive strategies. As an example, one student who confirmed that he does have a computer at home used his smartphone for all assignments. His work was often very low in quality, or arrived late, or was missing completely. In contrast, good students could describe how they adjusted to the lockdown. The 5 most common ideas tie well to the 4 Rs and with the definitions of resilience. Learning new skills sometimes connected to the lockdown, such as becoming better at cooking or other kinds of housework, and sometimes just a personal challenge, for example, students who took up new hobbies like crafting. As for improving their learning space, many students noted that their original setup at home was okay for average amounts of work, but not for studying all day every day. New chairs, desks, and rearranging spaces were some of the solutions they came up with. Overall, successful students were clear about aspects they could control with regard to their environment, approaches to learning, and their free time. Of course, there are things about lockdown period that were outside of student control. At first, students experienced actual pain from studying in their rooms as they were originally laid out. As I just mentioned, a number of students changed the room's arrangement or required new or better furniture. Other problems included teacher feedback. It could be unclear, unhelpful, or absent in some cases. From my memory, first semester was also tough on teachers physically and in terms of time for feedback. Having said that, no feedback at all, and in one teacher's case, not responding to emails, does nothing to promote resilience. Finally, students of all levels had anxiety regarding final exams. Japan has little culture of open book or take-home exams, for example, and students were worried about a number of things, including how not to be accused of cheating, what would happen if their answers were similar to other students' answers, and whether grades would be lower than in usual years as teachers tried to compensate for potential cheating. Some of these issues can be addressed in future semesters if learning from home remains necessary. Overall, though, there are many positives to help us if we need to teach like we did in 2020. Here's a reminder of the 4R model, which seems to be easy to teach to students in English or translate into their L1 as needed. And here are examples of what students did. These experiences can be used as examples in order to elicit more strategies, with the aim of sharing them among current and incoming students. So that's the overall experiences and the platforms covered. Moving on to activities, asking students to work with published materials in ways that were new for them, such as annotating, led to deeper learning and a break from comprehension questions. Mind maps and analogue note-taking based on classroom topics appear to be effective methods of promoting learner engagement. In general, students appreciated having something to show for their efforts. Answering questions via Moodle might contribute to learning, but once such work is submitted, it's largely gone. Creating something and being able to see it in front of you is motivating. It seems that nobody wants to make weak analog artifacts. So we have to acknowledge that too much is too much, and every single class should not have its own platform. However, a day full of Zoom or Moodle or Teams is a lot to ask. Having a homepage and letting students submit work by mail means headaches in terms of keeping track of attendance. You're literally making more work for yourself, but it might be worth it in terms of keeping students engaged. Finally, as we get ready for the incoming academic year, we can help our current and new students in a range of ways. We can talk about the 4 R's of resilience, resourcefulness, reflection and relationships, and ask students what is within their control that enhances these aspects of learning and development. We can also look for adaptive strategies similar to those used by workers who did well when they worked from home. Avoiding the minus points of these two styles while also making use of the positives from segmenting or integrating one's learning could boost student resilience. And importantly, resilience is not only a process, but also an outcome. We can ask successful learners what worked for them and pass this on to new students and those in need of a greater understanding of resilient learning. So thanks for your time. I hope the rest of the conference will be great and good luck in your classes this year.